Hey everybody, welcome to Away Games, a Chicago Cubs podcast, sitting firmly in the second wild card spot of Cubs podcasts. I think we would be, I don't know if we'd be competing for the division out of Cubs podcasts, I guess depending on how you measure success.
Sure.
But I think we're in the playoff picture. I'm Kevin McCaffrey. Look over there, it's Adam Mamawala.
Hello. Now it's interesting you mentioned this podcast rankings because I think we got to go like being a 5-tool player, right? So
Sure.
we're in terms of the comedy that we bring to it. I think we're an elite Cubs and baseball podcast.
Yeah,
but
and
in terms of other fields, who can say?
Yeah, and this is not, as you guys know, this is not like a primarily comedic podcast. It happens to be hosted by two people whose day jobs, night jobs combined are comedy things. But I do think the sense of humor that weaves its way within the show, I would actually put us at the top. Like, no offense to everybody else,
Yeah.
but that we fall beneath in other ways, I'm sure.
80 grade humor.
80 grade, yeah, 80 grade, yeah. We definitely have like it's you know how they have raw power and game power as two different sort of listings. It's like raw humor up to 80, and like game humor. I think we're bringing 60, which is still above average. And then there are moments with which we peak. In
That's
spite.
that's the niche we're trying to fill. Come here for actual knowledgeable information about the Cubs, but stay for me referring to Christopher Morel's penis.
Yeah, and he almost he made us reference that actually last week. Check the tape; you can do it. Follow us at Away Games Pod on Instagram and Twitter. I'm never gonna call it X.
No, there's no way.
It's not. You can't. Being on X is a different thing. We already have been. You can't be like, I'm on X at blank. It's that you're rolling, aren't you? That's a drug. That is like
right. And also, like, tweet has become a verb. So
Yeah.
are you like Xing? Is that what you call it?
I think they say post now. It's just so exhausting. It's just
Shitpost? Is it officially just called shitpost?
It is mostly now, but we're at Away Games Pod, where you know where to find us. We are recording a little earlier than we usually do because we're both we're both flying around the country a bit in the next coming days. Both working away games of our own.
Indeed.
Adam's modeling again.
I am. It's true. You should. Have you done Eitan Levine and Drex Clemens' Amazon sports talk show?
No, I haven't. I would love to.
You should do it. Much like Red Eye, it doesn't pay anything, but it is fun. But in the lobby of that building is a huge version of my face.
Oh, that's funny.
every week I get some other comic being like, "This is you, right? What is happening here?"
Yeah, my modeling work is probably still only in some bars in Europe now. When from the Mills whiskey advertisement I was in, but that's true. Two comedians. Also, I mean, I don't think there are two professional models on any other Cubs podcast either. So there are a couple rules we're putting forth.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yes, but we're recording this on Monday because we're both running around a bit, but so it hasn't been a full week since we last spoke. Yeah. But Adam, what's your vibes coming off the weekend? What did you like? What did you put us?
Yeah, my vibes are really good right now. I mean, you look at the past 12 games, and it's a stretch that we and everyone else in Cubs land was talking about as like, this is a time where you really need to take advantage of a softer schedule. And they did exactly what they needed to do. Like, they went 8-4. Would 12-0 or 10-2 have been lovely? Of course, but I think
we're not the Brewers, for Christ's sake. We don't just never lose in August, September anymore.
Can we just pause to say how just incredibly pathetic are the San Diego Padres? Like, what in the world?
They're losers. It is a loser. It's a loser team, and it's weird how it got that way. Because I have sympathy for. AJ Preller's. I think he's a weird guy. Just like personally, I know he's been accused of some things. That resemble cheating and things like that. But I understand how he put this team together because he put good players on the team. But so many of them are like weird wild card humans. I think that the combination of luck and sort of probably not having the best character on the team generally has combined to make them weirdly bad and so much less than the summer.
Yeah, they are so bad that the Mets are not the most disappointing team in baseball.
Right. Yeah, it is. And the Mets, you know how like far out of it the Mets were when they sold off and stuff. And San Diego, we've been talking about the run differential still in the
Hmm.
positive and all that
Yeah.
and all that stuff. They're a game apart in the standings right now.
Yeah, it's bad. But
Anyway.
I bring them up because they just got swept by the Brewers. The
Hmm.
Brewers also swept the Twins. The Brewers have now won 8 in a row. And the frustrating thing is that the Cubs have not only made up no ground, they have lost ground
Yeah.
as they head into the series through really no fault of their own. I mean, I think it would be insane to expect the Cubs to play at a better clip than winning 2 out of every 3 games. Like
Yeah.
that is what you fundamentally want to do in baseball. If you are, I would say, an elite team, winning 2 out of 3 games throughout an entire season is a 100-win team. So
You're taking that from here to the end, no matter what we're talking about
right,
in terms of relative schedules. You'd love that, and
yeah,
it sitting here at 69-61 is, we've reached the point where the Cubs, by record, are much better than I thought they were going to be at this
hmm
point. I thought this was going to be around 500, and they're playing decent, and and it seems like the times they have lost have been times where they've sort of own goaled it a little bit, where
hmm
they've made him just sort of the Drew Smiley start and then not pulling
yeah.
him early enough was annoying. But again, as you say, it has been winning 2 of 3, and we got to see, after Drew Smiley was annoyingly listed as the starter, he
hmm
did not end up being the starter for that game. Jordan Wicks came up and made his debut.
He did, and after what looked to be somewhat of a rocky start,
Hmm.
he was phenomenal. So he gives up. First of all, he gets squeezed on his very first pitch of his career,
Uh-huh.
which is hilarious.
Yeah.
Then Ke'Bryan Hayes hits a home run down the line. That's followed by, I guess, a walk and a single, or single and a walk in some order. And then, Tommy Hotovy came out like Gary Busey and told him, deal from your have to. And he
Yeah.
just settled down and from that point forward retired 15 consecutive batters. Went 5 innings, giving up just the 1 run, I guess, right? And
Yeah,
then
and struck out 9.
yeah, struck out 9, looked very good doing it. The changeup was, I mean, we have been spoiled looking at Kyle Hendricks' changeup for a long time,
Hmm.
and Jordan Wick's changeup is, I don't know, maybe I'm forgetting someone, but about as good as I can remember from a lefty that we've seen the
Yeah.
Cubs have.
Yeah, I can't think of a lefty starter the Cubs have had that has had like a particularly notable changeup. Like I don't think Ted Lilly leaned on it too much, but
No, I
the
think more of the curveball with Lily.
yeah, the curveball is his primary go-to, and Wicks is, he's in the low 90s with that fastball
Mhm.
velocity, which is perfectly fine. Obviously, we saw that sort of a late career, John Lester, and current Justin Steele is sort of working from that, and Steele obviously has the ability to hump it up, harder, sensual baseball, hump it up harder. Why don't you? But he low 90s from that left side, a plus changeup that has been a plus pitch for him dating back to
Mhm.
Kansas State. If you don't know much about Jordan Wicks, he was the Cubs' first round pick, 21st overall in the 2021 draft. He grew up in Arkansas, went to Kansas State, was arguably the top lefty college pitcher in the draft, certainly the most polished one coming out that year, I believe. And I was looking at his minor league numbers, and for a guy who I think the expectations and the projection has been, you feel very confident this is a back of the rotation
Mhm.
starter and could get a mid rotation starter value.
Right.
He was striking out more dudes in the minors than I thought. Well over a strikeout an inning in his short time in the minors. He's drafted in 2021. So, just a really good, cool debut and an iconic look with the glasses.
No question about it. Hopefully, he will be a much better version of those glasses than we saw from Kevin Gregg all those years ago.
Kevin Gregg, yes.
Yeah.
I was hearing on one of the other Cubs podcasts, the On to Waveland, with Brett Taylor, Sahadev, and Mooney, talking about weird things revolving around, sort of inspired by Marcus Stroman having the weird injury and going up to the booth. There was a time when Kevin Gregg he was blowing saves, got removed from the closer role, or wasn't closing for a minute, and then he blasted the front office, and then had to come back to the stadium and go to the booth and apologize. So it's just the Kevin Gregg experience, a weird quasi bummer of a time. I
Yeah,
guess.
every time there's a
What a
Cubs
throwback.
Marlins crossover in Immaculate Grid, I have to choose between Kevin Gregg and Antonio Alfonseca to torture myself with.
Yeah, those are
Um,
solid ones.
they're actually a weird number. I feel like I could name like 10 right now, but
Derek
that's not
Lee,
what we're here
Hesop
for.
Choi,
Juan Pierre.
Matt Clement. We got
Yeah.
there's a lot in there. Yeah, absolutely. Felix
So,
Heredia, for Christ's
oh,
sake.
that's a good one. That's a good one. But yeah, so Jordan Wicks obviously very impressive. Now that was followed immediately by Hayden Wisniewski being about as bad as you can be, especially in a spot where like really all you need is to be throwing strikes and getting the Cubs through that game without having to go into their much taxed and overworked bullpen, because the corresponding move to Wicks being called up was unfortunately Fulmer going onto the IL with, I believe it's a right forearm tightness is specifically what it's being called, which Fulmer has been very valuable, and he did have a kind of a rough outing this past week, which people jumped all over him for in a way that is incredibly unfair, frankly.
Yeah, he'd been great for a couple months. He started really
Yeah.
bad, and then yeah.
Yeah, so losing him certainly a big blow, and you got to hope he'll be back within within that 15 days, whenever that ends, because it is like a retroactive to August 25th sort of thing, I believe. So we saw Wisniewski, and I don't know that Wisniewski's been sent down. If he hasn't, he probably should be. But we did see Keegan Thompson yesterday pitch very well in 2 innings. And also the Cubs on a day that easily could have been one of those where it's like, oh, they're already looking ahead to the Milwaukee series. They come out flat. They don't get it done. Have a really nice game. I was already pre-worried when I saw Wisdom at first base. That didn't really end up being much of a factor, fortunately. Bellinger just continues to be about as clutch as a person can be, and got to avoid using Alzolay and using really any of the higher leverage relievers before this Milwaukee series. So yesterday specifically, you got to feel about as good as you can. And then even the one loss in the series, like Mitch Keller's really good.
He just is good. Yeah.
He's very good. And also, I still think that the overturn on the Bellinger call at first is inexplicable to me. Like, I don't see how, when he's called safe on the field, there's an angle that's definitive enough to overturn it. And maybe it wouldn't have mattered, but the point is, like, that was not a game I felt that the Cubs really shot themselves in the foot or did something.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good
like,
point.
They just got outpitched by a really good pitcher. Hendricks gave up 2 and then settled in the rest of the game. And it's hard to be mad about losing one of the 4 games to a really good pitcher.
No, Hendricks pitched really well in that loss, and Hendricks he's how he's pitched this year since he's gotten healthy again has been a guy who you feel fine with in the middle toward the back of your rotation, and it seems like that option the Cubs have on him for 1 year and $16 million seems like, so why wouldn't you do it at this point? I mean, we'll see. Obviously, things can change quickly as they did with Stroman, but I think the Wisniewski thing is a really good point, because you should have used him to piggyback earlier in the Smiley game, right? Sure. And that would have been helpful in that position. But Wisniewski has just been like so inconsistent and so prone to just an absolutely unusable blow up, like he did in the Mets game. That was the difference in the last game in the Mets series a couple weeks ago too, where after Hendricks pitched great, Wisniewski came in, couldn't get anyone out, and then they ended up losing that game by 1. So I think that's a guy who, pitched so well at the end of last year and shows how sometimes you got to slow the roll on some of this hype, because he just has not been it this year.
Can I tell you who he's been? He has become the new Dylan Maples, is exactly who he is.
Yeah, I could see that. Where
great stuff, can't seem to harness it at times, like frustrating because of how good the stuff can be, but just never seems to like settle into being usable.
Yeah. They were both guys with standout sliders. He's sort of like a volume down on the stuff Maples, but also like turn the volume up on the command, because he's not like the command it wasn't like Maples level unusable, but it's two guys where it's like, this should work. I'm looking at your profile. This should work. It just hasn't. So I think you're right in saying like he's got to go back down and just figure something out now, especially when the Cubs have Shane Green, who's a veteran reliever who's been starting in Iowa and doing really well. I think he's got to be close to next up. And like you said, Keegan, watching, so the results were great. 2 innings, 5 strikeouts, I believe, from Keegan Thompson there. And he pitched pretty well in Iowa lately. Looking at those pitch, like, It was a good outing. The strikeouts came on. It looked like to me he wasn't hitting really his location, but these are some bad hitters, and he did what you're supposed to do with bad hitters. But it makes me brace a little bit going into the next one. Like it was a good outing. I don't think it was quite as good as what the numbers look like, but this is also a guy who has a track record of experience getting in there, grinding, and being good when you need him, and. Man, it would be awesome to have him back and sharpening up.
Right, and even if all you're looking for out of him is like we're not going to put him in high leverage spots, I think it's clear that Ross has this kind of circle of trust at this point, which is essentially, especially without Fulmer, it's really just Leiter, Merriweather, and Alzolay. Like I don't really know who else is in that mix, but if we're talking about having like an extra arm for a game where you're getting blown out or you're blowing the other team out, based on a small sample size. It's hard to not say Keegan Thompson should stay on this team and Wisniewski should be in AAA.
Yeah,
like if you can't use someone in a cleanup role or in a blowout, like what can you use them for?
Yeah, and that was such an annoying one for Hayden to not be able to nail down too, because as you said, like having to use the high leverage guys at the end of that game is just like, man, they're so ground down as it is, and we're really pushing career highs and appearances and innings for these guys. That was the thing that hurts, especially before a Milwaukee series. But yeah,
and I guess Palencia is like kind of in the circle of trust ish. He was on the mound in the ninth, and then Alzolay had to come in. He also got squeezed pretty hard, but yeah.
But this is what happens when, and I'm not someone who really was advocating for the Cubs spending significant money on veteran relievers in the offseason. That also wouldn't be where I would choose to spend the bulk of my money. But this is sort of what happens when you don't, right? Like Alzolay has been as good as you could hope for. Leiter has been even better than you could hope for. Merriweather, same thing. The stuff was always there with Merriweather. He hadn't had the major league level success yet, even though he'd been pretty impressive in the minors. But it just is going to take some shuffling when this is how you how you spend on the bullpen. And I guess the guys you did spend on. Otherwise, Fulmer ended up being decent for most of the way here, but like Boxberger's been, nothing. Who knows if he'll come back at any point? I think he's getting healthy, but we just don't know yet. So,
did you have any other kind of takeaways from the Pittsburgh series? Anything that stood out to you?
Not really. I mean, really just seeing Jordan Wicks get in that rotation spot is exciting at this point, and that's a guy who is going to be. I don't think he's a guy who you are locked into for sure. That's going to be one of your 5 starters next year, but I think you're locked into considering it right now and seeing how he runs at the end of a year. It's sort of what they gave Wisniewski a chance to do last year. So no matter how this goes, obviously you can't just write it in pen, but this is seeing how a guy like Jordan Wicks, who played big time college baseball, which I think does matter, and seeing how he goes in a pennant race is like really valuable. So that's something I'm excited about, and I'm glad.
And for sure. And I think the only thing that we haven't talked about, we've mentioned Keegan Thompson pitching yesterday, but we haven't mentioned the fantastic outing from Javier Assad, who now. I mean, between these last 2 starts, between when I saw him in Toronto, like he has looked really, really good. And kind of like quietly, weirdly, I don't know if it's because he's not like super flashy or there's not as much hype around him as there obviously is for someone like Wicks getting called up. But for him to come into that spot and fill it like more than adequately has been like, you can't overstate how huge that's been.
No, he's been as good as Stroman was by the most important metric for me, which is the amount of runs you give up. I mean, that is, which I know is kind of old school to look at ERA before you look at, FIP or XFIP or whatever, which are also fine stats. I'm not shitting on those, but the results are the results. And I think Alzolay over his last, I forget however many starts it is, but it's like 6 or 7, I think.
Assad, you mean, or
excuse me. Yes. Assad. Assad over his last that many starts is the ERA is just a touch over 2. He's going deep
Yeah.
in games too. He's
Hmm.
gone 7 and a few times. And for a guy who began the year in the bullpen, that just going 7 innings is wildly unexpected. And I
Yeah.
think, it's sort of right. The prospect pedigree, he wasn't a huge money international signing. He wasn't a super high draft pick. He didn't, his stuff velocity wise really only popped in the last year or so, and like in the WBC.
Yeah.
Where he looked good. So and I guess he doesn't get a ton of strikeouts, but he's just like he's pounding the zone, and and
Hmm.
it seems like all the players really like him. So yeah, that's good to mention him. That's
For sure. And it's interesting you mentioned the WBC, because I think that's when a lot of us, obviously we were aware of Assad, and we'd seen him with the team before in limited, fits and starts, but he looked really impressive in the WBC, and it was really the velocity that had been ramped up that you figured like, it's maybe just the extra adrenaline of being on that stage. But yeah, he's been great, and it's interesting thinking about like what would the rotation be like, assuming pretty much it's guaranteed that if the Cubs are in the playoffs, they will be in that first round, the wild card round. Like even if they somehow win the division, it's unlikely that they'll be anywhere other than that, that 3-game set. So if it's me, I'm probably lining up. I go like Steele, Hendricks, Tyone, probably. I don't know.
it's Steele 1. I think
Yeah, Steele 1 for sure.
It's Steele 1, and then you figure Tyone and Hendricks are there in some order 2, 3. Tyone probably has been a little stronger recently, but also I would not have any big beef with either order there. But also, I guess we're assuming Stroman's not coming back health-wise, which is an assumption, but also, the longer it goes without getting an update, the longer it would take for him to ramp up, whatever.
Yeah.
I think those would be your 3, and I think it would be a case where you have Assad ready to come out of the bullpen and piggyback any one of those guys,
Right. Yeah, and I think it's too early to tell with Wicks, and in the same way that like if somebody gets called up and gets rocked, you shouldn't assume that they suck. I think it's also safe to say like, we can't just expect Jordan Wicks to be striking out 9 or 10 and giving up 1 run every start. It would be fantastic if that were the case. And, it's certainly, I think Bleacher Nation was tweeting about like how encouraging it is to see Steele and Wicks and Alzolay being as good as they are after what felt like an interminably long time of the Cubs not really producing any homegrown pitching or having people that we were all high on that either were traded like a Dylan Cease or just didn't pan out like a Braylon Marquez.
Right, totally, and there's more, however you want to count homegrown. Like Ben Brown was traded for at the deadline last year, but once he's healthy, he's there, and Cade Horton, the first round, the sort of surprise first round pick last year has been incredibly good. Like the Cubs, as of right now, I mean, it doesn't really count until it's working at the major league level. But as of right now, last year's pick of Cade Horton does look fantastic right now, and it's if he continues the way he has been, Cade Horton is going to be in the major leagues next year. He's going to do the same, 2-year jump. And just as a side thing, we're not going to see him in the majors this year, but Matt Shaw, the first round pick of the Cubs this year, is like hitting over 400. I think he's slugging at least
in
over
Double A,
6.
right?
If not, he's either slugging over 6 or 700. He's just like destroying the ball. He's openly told everyone his plan is to just make the majors soon. So the last 2 first round draft picks look fantastic. But to your point, there's some pitching here now, and there's more on the way, and that's nice because it hasn't been that way in a while.
Right. So the Cubs right now are 4 games out in the division. The Brewers have done nothing to help the Cubs. They've won 8 in a row. So despite the Cubs having won 7 of their last 10, the Brewers have won 8 of 10 and are now an extra game up. So they're up 4 games on the Cubs, including 4 in the loss column, and then the Cubs are in the second wild card spot. They are 3 games behind the Phillies. They're half a game above the Diamondbacks. Then behind them, you've got the Giants and Reds, both a game and a half back, and the Marlins, who seem to be fading a bit. They've lost 7 of 10, and they're now 3 back. But let me pose this to you. So it's August 28th. We've got basically a month left in the season. Cubs are 4 back of the Brewers.
Yeah.
True or false? If the Cubs don't win at least 2 of 3 against the Brewers, you can forget about the division.
I don't think you can quite forget about it yet because they play the Brewers again, right?
The last weekend of the season, yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say it's a forget about it yet. But I think if you get swept, it's more of a, okay, bye bye sort of thing. But yeah, you need, if you want to feel like the division is really in play, 2 out of 3 is kind of the minimum here. Things can, teams can go into weird spirals and stuff. So I feel like we've been saying every week for a lot of weeks, and that's what you do when a team's in the middle. But like, this week we're really going to see where we're at. What is this season? Yeah. So I would say no as far as forgetting it if they don't win 2 or 3. But yeah, this is where you finally have the chance to not have to be annoyed about watching Milwaukee's scoreboard business. Like, you do the scoreboard. Like, you control the scoreboard now.
Yeah, and the thing is, the Cubs really, really need to win tonight, because tonight they've got Tyon versus Wade Miley. The next 2 games, you got your Cubs have their guy going tomorrow. They got Justin Steele, but we're facing Corbin Burns, and then the Wednesday day game is Hendricks versus Woodruff. And I think you take your chances there, but Burns and Woodruff, the idea that you're going to beat both of those players or either of them, who the hell knows? So take advantage of Miley. I got to look at Miley's numbers. I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you, this number is, I think when Justin Steele goes off against Corbin Burns tomorrow, they should make him do the Ohtani, because he has a 1,000 batting average off of Corbin Burns.
That's true.
He did absolutely smoke him. So I would, get Steele's big bat out there for that one. Yeah,
Miley has good numbers.
Miley's been good.
I did not realize that.
Miley was a good pickup for the Cubs last year, the way they did it. It just injury-wise didn't work out, and Miley got hurt again this year, but he came back, and Miley's been good. Milwaukee's been extremely good pitching, extremely good run prevention-wise. Their outfield is incredible defensively, and also, like, he annoys me, Craig Counsell does, but it's hard not to say that's just not one of the best managers in baseball right now. Yeah. Early prediction, he's managing the Yankees next year, I'll say.
Interesting.
I'm just throwing it out there. He is not refused, but he has not been up for talking about an extension with the small market Brewers, and Boone has not done great, and people are angry in New York, and if he wants to deal with some more resources, that's we'll predict.
Right. Well, then you got to figure, if he manages the Yankees, Cato Kalin probably is the top guy you'd think of for.
He's got to be next in line. Yeah, absolutely. Show some fire at least. You know that.
He's still mad, by the way. Every now and again, I check his Twitter. He's still upset. Yeah,
yeah, totally. Yeah, but it's exciting. This is now the most exciting series of the year. Cubs versus Brewers, real ass rivalry, and it matters. Yeah.
This is fantastic. Do you know if Ken is going to any of the games?
I don't know.
I hope so. I'm sure there will be a lot of our Cubs Twitter friends will be there. I saw Sarah Sanchez already posting a photo at Murphy, so I'm going to assume that Sarah's going to be at least one of the games, probably multiple. But yeah, it's interesting. It's like you keep just adjusting what your expectations are. Where it's like, if you had told any of us at the beginning of the year the Cubs are going to be playing meaningful games in late August and September, you would have been like, I'll take my chances with that. But now we're where we're at. The Cubs, I think, are, at least on ESPN, are listed as having like a 64%
they should
playoff percentage. And I think you and I have shared the opinion that, like, at this point, them not getting in will be a disappointment.
Yeah.
But I also know that if and when they do get in, then I'll say, I'm just so happy they made it. But then once they're in that first round, I'll be like, well, I just want them to get out of the first round, and then so on and so forth.
Yes, we're greedy.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's nice to be in the position that the Cubs are in. And this is I was listening to Ron and Pat for a little bit yesterday, and Pat was talking about, like, yeah, this is a really big week coming up for the Cubs, and then they both were like, but at the same time, like, when you're in this position, every week is a big week. This week feels bigger because you can directly. You're making up. It's like a two for one, basically. You beat the team you're chasing, so you get that full game in the standings if you win. But there aren't going to be a lot of not important games, and I think that's one thing that's important to remember. Like, yeah, it was disappointing when the Cubs lost on Friday, but we as fans can't have this expectation of, like, just because of the magnitude of the games, like, oh, they have to win every game. we can't have that expectation, and I guarantee you the players don't have that expectation because it's just an unrealistic way to be a baseball team.
Yeah, and talking about how this is the most fun, most impactful series of the year thus far, it is. There's an off day Thursday, but every game between now and September 10th is sort of a twofer because it goes Milwaukee for 3, Cincinnati for 3, or excuse me, for 4, because there's a doubleheader on Friday. Yeah. And then San Francisco and Arizona, which are nearby wildcard competitors. So it's twofers almost every day, except for the off day Thursday. And Friday could be considered a fourfer because it's
the doubleheader.
Yes.
So yeah, and the thing is, the Cubs have 7 games against Arizona in a 10-game stretch.
Yeah.
From September 7th to 17th. So depending on how, and Arizona's had a very interesting year. Like they looked really surprisingly good early. Then they looked horrible, and now they've gotten pretty good again. They had a crazy game last week against the Reds that the Reds I think tied the game late. Then they went up by 3 in extras. Then the Diamondbacks scored 3 to tie it in the 10th on a a error, and then the Reds scored the go-ahead run on a balk with a 2-strike balk in the top of the 11th. So
things get sloppy this time of year. Yeah, and it's Arizona was like leading the division in June, and then way fell off, and then they're back. They're a young, interesting team, but there's a lot of those going on. But yeah, cool. I think that's all the updating I got for this week. You got anything else, Adam?
No, I don't think so, and it'll be very interesting, assuming we chat next Wednesday or approximately around that time. Like, a lot will have happened by then. Not only will these 7 games against the division rivals have been played, but we're also probably going to see some call-ups. We're going to see, a week from now, we may be seeing PCA on the Cubs. We may be seeing Little on the Cubs. I'm not sure who else to expect necessarily, but
I think prospect-wise, that's mainly who you're thinking about. Alexander Canario's been back from his injury and hitting the shit out of the ball lately, which is great. But if PCA's coming up, you feel like there's only so many sort of outfield at-bats to be going and get right now. And also, brief shout-out to Seiya Suzuki has really come back and has been hitting fantastically lately, too. So, so I think prospect-wise, PCA and Luke Little are probably the 2 big ones to look out for. And then... maybe a sexy old reliever turned starter like Shane Green. We'll see. Yeah.
And Ian Happ, if you're listening, just know that the tweet about you not being in the 3-hole, it was simply to motivate you to have a better weekend at the plate. And my apologies.
You got engagement that won't stop on that tweet. That people keep bumping that around.
Well, people keep thinking that they're like dunking on me by showing Ian Happ doing something well, but it's like that to me means that you don't understand how baseball works.
And what you're saying, and you are, I would across the board more polite to people on Twitter than I am. So I think you've handled yourself well. But if Adam is ever saying this feels like you think you're dunking, it's like that's Adam throwing a heavy right hand in your face. I feel like
I had a moment recently where it was one of those I was going to respond something snarky, and I took a deep breath and I did not, and then I was happy that I hadn't. We posted something about Wander Franco, and then someone replied like, "Everyone keeps talking about Wander Franco. What happened?" And I just wanted to reply literally Google, man.
Yeah.
But instead, I just posted a link to an article, and the person was like, "Thank you so much." So
look at that.
I didn't need to be an asshole. It might have been someone who just isn't as tech savvy as we all are. So there you go.
And if you want to get into that level of politeness and link sharing, follow us on Twitter at Away Games Pod.
Yeah. I mean, it really depends on if you or I are active at that very moment.
Yeah, sometimes I'll just be like, "Yeah, get fucked, buddy." But that is the joy of sharing a Twitter account. At Away Games Pod, check us out everywhere, and check out those Brewers games. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks, everybody.